Connecting the Dots with Dr. Wilmer Leon, where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge.
Good morning and welcome. You know, as we do the autopsy of the outcome of the 2024 election, what are the takeaways? Will the world as we have come to know it cease to exist over the next 4 years? Can Democrats course correct at the midterms? Welcome to the Connecting the Dots podcast with me, Dr. Wilmer Leon. And here's the point. We have a tendency to view current events as though they happen in a vacuum, failing to understand the broader historic context in which most of these events occur. During each episode, my guests and I have probing, provocative, and in-depth discussions that connect the dots between these events and the broader historic context in which they take place, thus enabling you to better understand and analyze the impact upon the global village in which we live. On today's episode, the issue before us is, first, an autopsy of the election. Then we will discuss Trump's focus, or the West's focus, on China. My guest is a special commentator on current affairs for CGTN, a professor of political studies at the University of Manitoba in Canada, and she's the author of the piece Western Persistent Disappointment Syndrome. Dr. Radhika Desai, as always, welcome back.
As always, great to talk with you, Wilmer.
So let's start with the question that I've been asking all of my guests since Tuesday. Your thoughts on the reelection of Donald Trump as the 47th president. And I know that you were at the Valdai conference when the election results were announced. Give us your thoughts, approach this from any perspective that you choose.
Well, so the Valdai Conference, as you know, is a major annual gathering of intellectuals, diplomats, scholars, activists, etc., from all around the world, which is hosted by the Valdai Discussion Club, which is based in Russia, and it always ends with a speech by President Putin, or certainly so far it always has. And so it did this year. The conference started on the 4th. We were there on election day, the 5th, and then, of course, going into the 6th, and we ended on the 7th, which is when President Putin addressed us. And as you know, this address by President Putin has been discussed and analyzed around. So my husband, Alan Freeman, and I were in the audience, as were 150 odd other people from around the world. So obviously, the discussion of the US election results was very big. And I would say that there were, of course, many different reactions. But my most prominent reaction was that, on the one hand, I was not surprised. I was perhaps surprised by the scale of the victory, and I put it in quotation marks because I'll come back to that a little later. But really, after an hour or two of digesting it and looking at the patterns and so on, what I realized is that it is more important to call the outcome of the election a defeat for the Democrats rather than a victory for President Trump or his Republicans. So that's my sort of initial reaction, and then we can unpack it as we go along.
You sponsored a discussion of which I was a part a few days before the election, and you asked me my prediction, and I had said that I expected that Vice President Harris would win, and I had changed my prediction based upon that just utterly disgusting racist diatribe. Well, there are actually a couple of points. One, the utterly disgusting racist diatribe that took place in New York on the 26th. I thought that was so vile and so beyond the pale that would move the Latino community in droves to the polls. The other thing was, I was looking at the numbers for early voting, and historically we know that large turnout for early voting tends to favor Democrats. But what we found in this election is Donald Trump flipped the script, and he encouraged his base to turn out early. And they did. And the final thing is Vice President Harris ran from her base where Donald Trump locked in and stayed with his base. Your thoughts?
Well, exactly. I mean, the so first of all, the Democratic Party decided to go with Vice President Harris as their presidential candidate after July for for a couple of different reasons. One is, of course, they were perhaps being penny wise and pound foolish, thinking that if they nominated her, then she could keep the war chest that Biden had nominated. But really, I mean, obviously, Biden hung on for too long. There was no time for a primary, or at least that's what they said. But if they had a stronger candidate with a better program, it wouldn't have mattered what skin color they were or what sex they were or what have you. So the fact is that they decided to go for Harris because to keep the money, and they thought that somehow because she was a black woman, that somehow this would be a winning combination. And what we realized is that without the right policies, your supporters are not going to come out for you. And so that was one thing. And the second thing is that I think, again, this is to underline my point, that this is really a defeat for the Democrats. They didn't have good policies. And in the end, Trump ended up gaining more votes from practically every social group, I think, other than the over 65s and college educated women. They actually, even though they may not have got more than a majority, they got better votes, better proportion of them than last time. But what it also shows is that those people who supported Harris did not, or might have supported Harris, did not turn out to vote. So it's not about sexism, it's not about racism, and the whole, it almost seems as if the Democratic Party and the US establishment, of which the Democratic Party is such a big part, really have started thinking in the same way as social media algorithms think. They think about voters not as intelligent beings who have views and ideas and have their own analysis of their problems, but rather as demographics. If you are black, if you are a black man, earning so much and have a college degree, you're going to do this. If you are a Latino woman who earns so much and has no degree, etc., you're going to do this. And this all came falling apart in the outcome. Now, I just also wanted to come back to your prediction. I mean, at some level, of course, I don't think you were necessarily wrong in thinking what you did, but really, I think what that showed is that the fact that, your prediction didn't come true, what it showed really is that elections are decided not by campaigns. They are decided by much more longer term trends. And to me, and in my analysis, and this is also in my book, which came out a year ago, Capitalism, Coronavirus, and War, in which I analyze the state of, politics in particularly in neoliberal financialized economies like the US and the UK. Basically, this is what we are looking at in this election. The election result has to be analyzed as a long-term consequence of the adoption of neoliberalism. When it was adopted back in the late 70s and early 80s in these countries, it was widely expected that it would return economies to growth, to health, etc. When it did not, it should have been abandoned, but no. What becomes very clear when you look at this long-term point of view is that saying that it was going to save the economy and turn the economy around and end the stagnation that had set in the 1970s was just the way of winning votes for this platform. But in reality, this platform was not contingent on whether it would succeed or fail. The ruling establishment was going to stick to this platform no matter what. Why? Because its purpose was not to restore economies to health. Its purpose was not to promote markets and competition. Its purpose was really to further the interests of the big monopoly corporations that dominate these economies. And of course, we have seen the result of sticking to these policies, which is that if anything, the power, the wealth, the profitability of these corporations is through the roof. We are now living in levels of inequality not seen ever in human history. And the election result is an outcome of that.
So getting back to the initial question, you being in Europe, you being at Valdai, do you get a sense of dread going forward? Do you get a sense of exuberance going forward? Do you get a sense of insecurity? I'm just wondering, is there a sentiment that is being articulated in Europe that's not being reflected in the Western press?
Well, this is a rather complex question. And if I may, I just would like to preface that by making another point, really, which is about the election results. Why do I say that this is a defeat for the Democrats and not a victory for Trump? Right after the election, the very important conservative intellectual Francis Fukuyama wrote a piece in the Financial Times in which he says that Trump has changed the paradigm of US politics, that Trump essentially has, he says, we thought that when Trump was elected and then defeated, that he was the blip in the long-term evolution of US politics. But now it looks as though the election and then subsequently the defeat of Biden-Harris was the blip, and that according to Fukuyama, Trump represents a new phase in the evolution of American politics, perhaps as important as the change in mood in the post-Second World War period and then the second change in mood in the neoliberal era. So now we are looking at a third major transformation of US politics, and I somehow don't think he's right. Not somehow. I know why I don't think he's right. And the reason is that Trump really does not have a policy. What Trump has been able to do is he has been able to mobilize everybody who is discontented with the way with the neoliberal policy of advancing the interests of big corporations. But he does not necessarily, he has mobilized the discontents. He has got them to vote for him 3 times now in very substantial numbers, and twice delivering him a victory. But does that really solve the problems of the people? Clearly, at the end of his first term, he had clearly failed to do that because he did not get a second term immediately, and Biden won with very, very big numbers against him. The divide between Biden and Trump back in 2020, the difference in the popular vote was much bigger than the difference in the popular vote that you have now, which is like less than about 4 million at the moment. I believe they haven't finished counting, but we're nearly at the final figures. So in this sense, Trump did not win this election. Harris lost it. Trump does not have a vision. Trump is willing to do whatever is convenient because he doesn't have a vision for America. He wants to be president. That's that's the key. And he doesn't even necessarily have any clear masters, as the Biden-Harris camp did. So it's not very clear where he will go. As you see in all the newspapers, whether they're talking about his foreign policy or his domestic policy, exactly what he'll do. Will he impose tariffs? Will he solve the Ukraine problem? Will he continue to support Israel? Will he continue to target China? On all of these questions, there is one word that occurs repeatedly, and that's unpredictability. Trump has no serious program. So what he'll do is really up for grabs. And the only thing that perhaps people may take some comfort in is that he's not so ideologically committed to pursuing the wars, to the domestic neoliberal program, etc., as the Democrats have been so far. So I wanted to get that in. Now, let's come to the question of Europe. Now, in Europe, really, the European governments are all caught in a bind. As you know, even before Trump was elected, European governments, which are today predominantly governments that are very, very deeply integrated into the democratic, globalist, declining imperialist program that
That's
the United
democratic,
States.
capital D.
Democratic capital D,
Well, the
exactly, as in
Democratic
the
Party.
Democratic Party,
Right.
exactly. So they are very much invested in that. So take, for example, even someone like Boris Johnson, you'd think he would be a natural ally of Trump. But no, he, as you know, was not only a very special, important cog in the Biden Democrats machine, which was basically waging this war of trying to retain some shred of American dominance, of course, vainly, because this is not possible anymore. But that's what they were trying to do, and in going, for example, in undoing the deal that could have been made in March or April of 2022, and so on. He has acted like a very, very important servant of the Biden Democrats project. So in that sense, the most European establishments are not necessarily allied with Trump. So in that sense, they're trying to they're trying to absorb, really. If you look at the discussion, there are the liberals, basically, the American word for liberals, the progressives, essentially, or the people who claim they are progressives. They are basically tearing their hair out, what are we going to do, etc. And I would say that this is the moment in time when it is possible that with all these governments in trouble in one form or another, Starmer won an extremely problematic victory, and he's already in trouble. Macron, as you know, in the elections, that snap elections he called in the summer, he also got a huge slap on the wrist. The German government is in trouble. So in practically all of these, in all the major capitals of Europe, there is essentially, they are all stunned. And I think that the time is now ripe for some kind of sense to prevail, where some kind of forces to emerge, which say that Europe has no business, in taking part in this failing American imperialist enterprise, that Europe has every reason to strike out on its own, come up with a peace deal, etc. But the question is whether this will be possible in the near term. So I would say that in Europe, you see basically a lot of confusion.
You first of all, to those that are commenting, thank you all so much, trying to engage in the conversation. So please do with super stickers, and that way we can address the issues that you all are raising with everyone. You said, Professor Desai, Trump did not win, Harris lost it. I agree with you 1,000% there. Hence my piece, Requiem of a Failed Candidacy and Party. You said Trump has no particular ideology. I think you are correct there. He's an incredibly transactional individual, and basically his ideology is Donald Trump. What's in it for Donald Trump? What's in it from a business perspective for Donald Trump? And Muslim Revert says many voters viewed Trump as the lesser of two evils. I believe that is true, but we know the adage, the lesser of two evils is still evil. And to that point, I was saying to a lot of people, if you're torn between that construct, the lesser of two evils, and you think long-term, vote third party in the United States. The way you send the message to the duopoly is not to stay in the duopolistic construct, move outside of it. If Jill Stein had walked away with 18, 19%, that would have sent an incredible message to the elite in this country. Your thoughts, Dr. Desai?
Absolutely. And I think that they knew it. The elite in your country knew exactly that, because as I may have mentioned in some of our earlier conversations, Wilma, Alan and I, my husband and I, were working very closely with the Stein campaign. We were all prepared, and Michael Hudson, we were all prepared to contribute, as much as was needed on the policy front, etc. And we started out very well. We produced a few documents, but what happened more or less through, right from the beginning or the spring of 2024, is that the Stein campaign was basically embroiled in battles just for getting on the ballot.
Mhm.
And these battles, and these battles were not just battles with the state governments and the rules and regulations, which at one level would have been understandable. These were battles which were made all the sharper, all the more time consuming, all the more exhausting by the efforts of the Biden camp, of the Democratic camp, to throw ever more spanners in the works, make it as difficult for them as possible, so that in many states they won access. In a big state like New York, they won access, where Jill Stein would have had a lot of sympathizers. They won ballot access, but only on a write-in basis. Now, how many people are going to, how do you publicize all this? You've exhausted yourself just getting to that place. So I would say that they knew it very well, and that is why they acted to throw all everything and the kitchen sink against Jill Stein. As you know, prominent allegedly left-wing Democrats like AOC and so on were also attacking Jill personally. So in all of these ways, they basically did all they could, but still Jill Stein came third, okay, by a very, very distant third. And I think she bettered her performance of last time. So that's good, because, going into this election, we thought that things never looked better for a third party candidate since at least Ross Perot's candidacy back in 1992. As you know, he was sometimes polling at near the figures you were mentioning, near 18 and 20%. So in that sense, we were really hopeful that this time around, the need for a third party would be, really registered in the poll results, in the election results. But that was not to be. But I would say that if we all agree that Trump has not won and that the Biden-Harris camp has lost, then I think it's very much, it's high time that people who realize that this duopoly is not working really try to construct from below, from bottom up, a new political force, I should say, that will really represent the ordinary working people of the United States. Because if there's one thing that's missing in this picture, it's that.
You mentioned Ross Perot, and that makes me think. I want to say it was Admiral Stockwell who he selected as his vice presidential running mate, and that really was his undoing. Because when Admiral Stockwell came on television and said, "I don't even really know why I'm here," that, but anyway, this I think for some will be a tough question, but I think it's a question that needs to be asked, and that is the power of APAC. And I don't really hear any analysis coming here about APAC. And the power, when you look at Hakeem Jeffries and how much APAC money he took and the resulting positions he takes. Kamala Harris, in fact, her husband, the first gentleman, is an APAC lobbyist. And the money that APAC put in her campaign, her Gaza platform is APAC. And so I've been saying to folks, to those that are now crying in their beer about the results of the election, and you're asking yourself what to do, call APAC and ask them. See what they'll do for you now. Jamal Bowman lost. I mean, there are a number of, I keep going back to this article that was in the New York Times where APAC said, we're going to invest $100 million into the Democratic primary. And nobody raised a voice when they said that. But now we sit here and cry, what are we to do? Well, I say, call APAC. Dr. Desai.
Well, talk about foreign interference in US elections, right? I mean, this is absolutely, I mean, there is no doubt that I want to say two things. Number one, I agree with all the things you said. I think that APAC spends a lot of money. APAC is able to shut down criticism of Israel fairly effectively in the US. Of course, at the level of elite politicians, we know that ordinary Americans have been coming out onto the streets in really big numbers, particularly Muslim Americans, but also more broadly. I mean, it's certainly not confined to Muslim Americans. So on the ground level, it's not that APAC is able to shut down what people think, but at the level of the political establishment, of the level of people who are either in Congress or fighting to be in Congress, yes, they can buy the silence of a lot of people. But having said that, and given that, Donald Trump is presumably also very much, I mean, he has a declared pro-Israel bias. His son-in-law, Jared Kushner, has also been very actively working in support of Israel, etc. Given all this, I would not be surprised, however, if Trump were somehow to pursue a different policy than one-sided support for Israel, or at least he may continue supporting Israel but take a different line, which would also be true, that the pursuit of this war is not in the interest of Israel, and therefore exercise a greater a degree of control over what Israel is doing. And clearly, I think the Israeli government knows this, because it seems to be trying to do whatever it can before Trump is inaugurated in order to pursue its own aim. I'd just like to say one other thing, which is that, I personally think that while APAC is very powerful, I think that the US imperialist project, of which, of course, the Biden-Harris Democrats are the most zealous pursuers today, this project independently requires an instrument of US policy in the Middle East. And that's what Israel has been. And I think that, so I would say that looking at APAC alone tends to let American imperialism off the hook.
Great point. Daniel Drazenovich with a super sticker says, where does the working class go? Dr. Shiva, Jill Stein, Cornell West, where does the working class go, Dr. Desai?
Well, I would say that to my view, I thought Jill Stein ran a very, very good campaign with a very broad vision. The slogan that the team came up with was very important. She was the only candidate that stood for ordinary people, the planet, for ecological sustainability, and for peace. And I would say that this kind of approach that she had, which completely accords with what I feel, I think that's the sort of approach you need. I mean, even RFK or Cornel West, of course, I have a lot of respect for Dr. West. And initially, by the way, Jill and all of us were working with him. But right. He did not wish to participate in any but he did not wish to be the Green Party's candidate. And we did not think that any candidate would go very far without the backing of a party and all the apparatus that it brings. Because without this backing, Jill would not even have got the ballot access that she did. So from that point of view, where is the working class to go? I think the working class should stop thinking about lesser evil types of policies. I think working class people should think of creating unity across the divides of gender and race and all these culture wars that have been dividing the working class, and really to move forward. Remember, right now we are living in a world where the overwhelming majority of the people earn a fraction of what a tiny elite earns. So we have an interest in a very, very broad-based unity. And I would say that is where the working class needs to go. The working class needs to start organizing from below.
And A Random Jack writes, no matter who wins, we all lose. I disagree with that. I think it's very fatalistic. If I were to take on that mentality, then instead of sitting here talking to you, trying to encourage change, I'd be playing golf. And I mean that seriously. I'd seriously be playing golf. And also what I think that does is a big part of the problem to me is we as the citizens have abdicated our responsibility. We don't vote to the degree that we should. B, though too many of us that do vote believe that once we voted, our job is done. Where in fact, I believe the job of the citizen has just begun because we aren't holding our officials accountable For example, very simple, I think, very quick example, the issue of women's access to health care. Barack Obama ran on that. His first campaign, didn't deliver it. Ran on it his second campaign, didn't deliver it. Then his vice president runs for president. He runs on it, doesn't deliver it. And then Kamala Harris, his vice president, runs for president on it. She didn't get elected. Part of that, I believe, has to do with the fact that people didn't trust that they would deliver it. But once Obama got elected, where was the push? Where was the outcry? Where was the demand? And so, as Franklin Roosevelt said to A. Philip Randolph, I hear you, Mr. Randolph. Now go out and make me do it. And that's the big piece of this that I think is missing. Dr. Desai.
You are so right. I mean, several points. Number one, in our societies, in Western societies today, we are all, as members of these societies, we are all encouraged to think of ourselves primarily as consumers rather than citizens. And I think we have to stop doing that. I think that and in fact, there is a great deal of it would actually make our lives much more interesting if, rather than choosing which shampoo to buy or which suit of clothes to buy, we were actively thinking about how to remake the neighborhoods in which we live, the cities in which we live, the states and countries in which we live. I think this would be something much more interesting. And I would also say that, I was going to give an example very similar to the one you gave. Back in the 30s, when as FDR's New Deal was flagging, and a bunch of trade unionists went to see him to say, they needed this and that and the other. And basically what he did is he urged them to mobilize, to come out and state their demands, to essentially agitate for it. And he said, towards the end of all this, he said, I want you to strengthen my hands, because even a politician as powerful as FDR cannot act against the wishes of the political establishment unless there is pressure from below. So I think that organizing, like you say, it's not just a question of voting. I think we need to keep our elected officials accountable at all times, accountable on all the causes we care about. And the other important thing is that we have to realize that we can't just be single issue agitators. We have to realize that we have to be able to compose our cause into a broader program in which you also respect other causes that are beneficial for people and so on. And I just want to say one other thing, and that is that because the Democrats have lost, I expect that there is going to be a knockdown crisis in the Democratic Party. And this knockdown crisis will be bound to form the very, very fertile terrain on which an alternative can emerge. And the reason I say that, in fact, just today I was reading a very absurd column, at least I consider it very absurd, about how the Democrats might win in 2028. No, I think the Democrats are in for a really, really bad time for reasons that I sort of begun to talk about, which is that this is part of a long-term process. Correct. In which the neoliberal policies, or the bipartisan pursuit of neoliberal policies, which was very clear right up until Obama, essentially began to create a situation in which the people became detached from their alleged leaders. And the Republican Party was the first party to feel the effects of this, because the adventurer Trump came along and he said, okay, I'm going to exploit the opportunity represented by the detachment of the leaders and the people, the mutual detachments of the leaders and the people from one another. And he, in his own way, I would say, which is a deceptive way, which is a duplicitous way, but nevertheless, in his own way, he defeated the Republican Party establishment. The same fate has not been dealt to the Democratic Party establishment. And I think that the Democratic Party establishment was heading for a fall, and this is its fall. And I would say that I would be very surprised if it, first of all, I'd be very surprised if it recovered in anything resembling its current form. It is impossible for it to reconstitute itself, because so many of the shibboleths of the old democratic establishment, this idea that, you can always keep the black vote on side and the Latino vote on side and the women's vote on side and so on. All of these illusions have been shattered. And so now there's going to have to be a very different politics for all these constituencies that have so far been inveigled into voting for the Democrats: working people, women, and of course the working class itself is very diverse. So I'm just saying, the diverse working class, including its women, its non-white people, its Latino people, everybody, all these people will need to, and the groups representing them on the ground from the bottom up are going to have to think about creating a wider coalition. I think this is the only way you can go forward. Otherwise, by the way, if this is not done, the Democratic Party's crisis will not end. The chaotic, unpredictable rule of Republicans may continue for a while, or there may be some further worse denouement of the current situation.
You are spot on. You are spot on. I had written down for my next question, I had thought we would get into this a little later, but what do the Democrats do now? And because they have an opportunity in 26 in midterm elections to obstruct the process, to maybe regain control of the Senate, maybe regain control of the House. Big maybes there. But if they just sit back now and cry in their beer, right now, they should already be articulating a message. They should already be talking about the future. They should understand that what the electorate clearly understands is that post-Obama, Democrats have become neoliberal. Post-Obama, Democrats have become warmongers. Post-Obama, Democrats don't give really a damn about the social safety net. Hence, in my piece, I talked about they ran from their base. Instead of Kamala Harris embracing Dick Cheney, she needed to be embracing Bernie Sanders. Instead of running around with Liz Cheney, she needed to be running around. She got the wrong Liz. She needed to be running around with Elizabeth Warren. And so that, to me, is a clear example of the elite stop listening to the base. Donald Trump ran to his base. One of the other mistakes that I made in my analysis leading up to the election was I was saying Donald Trump never went from the primary campaign to the general election campaign. And now I understand why. Because he knew he didn't have to broaden his appeal if he stuck with his base. And so when people were begging for a change in the Gaza policy, Kamala Harris doubled down on it. When people were begging for a change in Ukraine, Kamala Harris doubled down on it. When asked, what are you going to do different? She had no answer. Dr. Desai.
Yeah, I was going to mention as well, you asked earlier about what it looks like from outside the United States, that the two big burning questions of our time are, of course, Ukraine and Gaza. And I would say that, again, on both counts, simply because Trump is unpredictable, not that he's principled, not that he's a particularly attractive character, certainly for somebody of my gender and color. I'm not sure I could particularly, I think he said so many sexist and racist things. It's abhorrent. Having said that, I would say that precisely because he doesn't have a policy, precisely because he's unpredictable, there are small openings for the possibility of settlement in the case of these wars. Because if there's one thing that that Trump has represented, and I think his first term shows it, he's not particularly eager to prosecute wars. Indeed, in his first term, as we know, he did not start a war, whereas Biden has started two big ones and was threatening to start a third one against China. I would say that on all the three issues, Ukraine, Gaza, China, on all three issues, I can imagine Trump taking a more pragmatic view, one that will essentially reduce the burden on the American taxpayer of funding wars, and also allow him to concentrate, if he can, I'm not sure, but on bettering the US economy. I'm not sure he has a plan for that. But on all the, so I would say that it is possible, because in China, of course, the biggest threat that he is wielding against China at the moment is tariffs. But even many of his own advisors are pointing to the inadvisability of tariffs. And if, in order to sort of concede a little bit to Trump, they say, okay, maybe tariffs are okay, but we have to introduce them very gradually. And everybody is very aware that that you cannot impose tariffs without this having a direct effect on prices and price rises for the American consumer. So in all of these ways, and I guess there's just one other thing I should say, in terms of Trump and domestic policy, Trump does not, the Biden-Harris Democrats represent a very elite corporate CEOs and so on. And Trump represents a sort of a more maverick section. Some people have called them a warlord section of the American corporate establishment, with people like Musk and so on. So in this situation, I would say that the Harris-Biden camp represented a certain type of more regulatory-minded capitalism, in which they claim to regulate capitalism, but of course they regulate it so lightly that they, the corporate capitalists still get away with murder. In Trump's case, there's absolutely no pretense of even trying to regulate capital. It's just a question of freeing capital. So it's almost as though, in a context where American corporate capitalism is unable to produce any growth at all, and the ideal situation for them would have been greater regulation. It's as though, and therefore, the asylum needs to be, kept in the hands of those who run the asylum. In fact, under Trump, what you see is that the inmates have taken over the asylum, so to speak. And I think you could see a lot of economic mayhem.
Let's shift gears a bit to a piece that you have written, a phenomenal piece that you have written, and the Western persistent disappointment syndrome. You write, the Western business press appears chronically dissatisfied with China's economic policy. Such disappointment is likely to persist. It arises not from anything Chinese authorities are doing or not doing, but from fundamental Western misunderstandings about what truly drives Chinese growth and how Chinese authorities management. What is it that the Western press does not understand? And this is in the context of in July, China came out of the third plenary session of the 20th Central Committee of the Communist Party of China, and the statements that resulted about the direction of the Chinese economy. Dr. Desai.
Well, for the last many years, actually, the Western press has been moaning that China invests too much and it does not consume enough. And they advise, even from prominent authorities like the World Bank and so on, to China, has been that they should shift the balance between investment and consumption. So if you think of the national economic pie, what is consumed is not invested, and what is invested is not consumed. So there are basically two parts of it. So, and China regularly invests a little over 40% of its GNP, whereas the corresponding figure for the United States is less than 20%. It's more like between 15 and 20%. So that is a very low level of investment. Now, and of course, part of the reason they are saying this is because, as you saw in the case of this big war of tariffs against EVs and electronic vehicles and so on, the Western interests generally, the Trumpite faction, let's put it that way, and the Bidenites. Biden took on this whole issue of China from Trump lock, stock, and barrel and pursued the anti-China economic agenda even more zealously than Trump did. So this agreement seems to be that China is exporting too much, and that the way to deal with China's export surplus with the United States, which is, by the way, once again reaching record heights, the way to deal with it is to put pressure on China to consume more and export less. Now, actually, on this, so there are three variables. There is consumption, there is exports, and there is investment. Now, China already realizes that it cannot export as much as it used to. I mean, China was never entirely an export-dependent economy. It's too big an economy to be really very export-dependent. But nevertheless, it was more export-dependent than it is now. But as of a couple of years ago, it announced, like in 2020, so more than a couple of years ago, it announced the so-called dual circulation policy. So the idea is that there will be exports, but there will also be expanded domestic consumption. And so that China has already is essentially pursuing. And the third plenum, which, by the way, is the every 5 years, they have this quinquennial forum in which top-level policymakers get together to chart the future of the next 5 years. So it has generally been known to mark important turning points in China's development. So the last plenum, of course, it committed itself to a number of initiatives to boost domestic consumption, including expanding social services, education services, increasing wages, improving the environment, offering more cultural opportunities, etc. There were a whole slew of proposals around that. And remember, in Asian countries, the levels of savings is high, and therefore the level of consumption can be low because the welfare state is not as elaborate as you might think. I suppose the situation is not that different in the United States, given how fragile the welfare state net is. But nevertheless, because the welfare state is not there, so they're proposing to expand the welfare state net and all these wonderful things. But on top of that, and so they're doing that. They have accepted dual circulation. But on top of that, the third plenum of 2024 suggested something else, which is that they want to put China on the path to the development of what they call new productive forces. That is essentially pursuing new technologies and launching new technologies, products, and processes that will enhance life, that will be contribute to environmental sustainability, to the whole climate change agenda, and so on. And they are, the Chinese are remarkable that way because they have a broadly planned economy. I mean, it's not a command economy, but they have a broadly planned economy. If they set their sights on something, they may make several mistakes on the way to reaching that goal, but they learn from their mistakes and eventually they right themselves and they usually achieve that goal. They usually more than achieve the goal, and they usually achieve the goal well before the deadlines that they set themselves. So finally, to make a point of this, China has been essentially pursuing, without announcing the policy, has been pursuing new technologies for a long time. And there has been recently, over the last couple of years, the Australian Strategic Policy Institute, which is a very important anti-China outfit. They have something called a technology tracker. And this technology, they track, the advancement of various types of technologies between the West and China. And they said that out of 44 technologies that they are tracking, China is leading in 37 of them. And they include all sorts of cutting-edge technologies like nanotechnology, AI, defense-related technology, and all sorts of things. So you can imagine. So to come back to this, the Western press is mourning because they want China to solve the West's problems. The problem of the trade deficit is the West's problem. Our exports are not sufficiently competitive. You got to make them competitive. And that's your job. China is not going to do that for you.
A couple of things. Shelly H., thank you for your super sticker. Just saying hi. Hot Channels, I didn't forget the fact that the campaign website was policy free. I actually put that in my op-ed, Requiem for a Failed Candidacy. We didn't go through all of the points. So Hot Channels, thank you very much. Before I get to a question, Dr. Desai, I want to go back to your piece And I want to read this. It's a bit of a long read, but I know that I think this is important. The part of the statement that came out of the 20th Central Committee, the plenary session, China is pursuing. Listen, folks, this is what they say: revolutionary breakthroughs in technology, innovative allocation of production factors, in-depth industrial transformation and upgrading, and the optimal combination of laborers, means of labor, and subjects of labor, as well as their renewal and upgrading. Now, so Dr. Desai, what I hear is the United States saying, we as the United States, we deindustrialized our economy. We exported the manufacturing jobs that used to drive the American economy to China. And now the American economy / empire is in decline. It's tanking. And now the United States needs China to shift away from its successful economic plan to an economic plan that accommodates the failing American economic plan. Am I wrong?
Absolutely not. This is exactly the thing. In fact, I want to go back to a question that one of your listeners raised earlier. What are American working people to do? Where are they to go now? And I would say that, one of the things that any reconstruction of a left politics or a progressive politics, I don't mind what you call it, a politics that is in the interest of ordinary people in all these countries, including the United States, that sort of politics will require us all to realize that we have been fooled, we have been deluded by the dominant interests about things such as socialism. You're made to feel afraid of planning, and you're made to feel afraid of public ownership, etc. But think about it: the most prosperous times and that you've had in the United States and in any Western country for ordinary people, the most dynamic, productive economy that you've had in most Western countries have been during the war, when the state was into planning like there was no tomorrow. I mean, they were planning the economy in the United States, in the UK, and everywhere, down to like where every last ton of iron ore was going to be mined and where it was going to be taken and how it was going to be processed and how much would be consumed and how much would go for arms and how much would soldiers eat, and etc., etc. All of this was being planned, and it was being planned with a great degree of efficiency. Mm-hmm. So I would say that restoring the discussion, at least, of things like socialism, of planning, of things like, the idea that people will not work if you give them welfare, that's nonsense. Often people will work better when they have a good
security,
income, something to fall back on, etc. So that this needs to be changed. And then I just wanted to say that, in the United States, we often talk about jobs going south, that our businesses are investing abroad, and that's what's killing the United States industry. No, it's worse than that, because North American big corporations like Walmart or even any big corporation, they don't invest in China or Indonesia or Bangladesh or wherever it is. They subcontract. They outsource. So the investment is actually done by Chinese people or Indonesians or Bangladeshis or wherever they are. So the investment is theirs. And because the investment is theirs, they are also able to have more options, because, today they are manufacturing, pillows for Walmart. And tomorrow they will shift to something else. And that's what accounts in a well-planned economy like China for the enormous industrial advance that you have experienced. It's not because of foreign direct investment by big American corporations. So the deindustrialization has happened as a result of this. And a final point is that, quite frankly, we're now living in times where big corporation dominated capitalism is really exhausted. All it can do is take. It cannot make. And as a consequence, I think that if we want a decent life, I'm not even talking about an ostentatiously, obscenely consumerist life. I'm talking about a decent life where people have good food to eat, good places to live in, good education, good transportation, good healthcare. You are going to have to think about planning the production of all these things.
Because we know the adage, failing to plan is planning to fail. That
Exactly.
adage is, whether it's your retirement program, whether it's the next 6 months of your finances, failing to plan is planning to fail. I'm going to ask you this question, and I'm going to ask you the question, and I'm throwing the question out to the audience, and would like for the audience to respond. And folks, also remember, like and share, and please subscribe, because we are here for you, but can't do this without you. Dr. Desai, do you believe that the American empire is at a turning point? Yes, no, or has it already turned and we just don't yet know the outcome of such a turn? But as we look at the rise of BRICS, as we look at the rise of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and we look at the move towards de-dollarization, do you believe that America is at a turning point? And again, audience, if you would please also respond, we'll give some of your responses to Dr. Desai as well.
Yes, I think it's at a turning point, but it is at a turning point in a downward trajectory. So, in a certain sense, it was already going downward. Now it's going downward at a steeper or more accelerated pace. So, that's the first point I want to make. But the second point I want to make is, yes, of course, it is on a downward trajectory because of the rise of China, the rise of the BRICS, the initiatives they are taking towards integrating their economies further, de-dollarizing, and all those things. These were all the subjects of fascinating discussions, by the way, at the Valdai Club conference. And by the way, if you want to look for it, there's also a wonderful discussion I have with some other people who were there, which you can look out for from the Valdai Club conference. It's on YouTube somewhere. But let me also say one other thing, and that is that the ultimate reason for this decline is actually this accelerated decline is actually the weakening of the power of American capitalism, which was not something you could do anything about. But essentially, neoliberal capitalism of the last 40 plus years has shown us that capitalism is exhausted and it cannot take the American economy very much further. And what we are going to see really under a Trump presidency, and Trump does not have any kind of a plan to take the economy in his own hands and do no serious plan to improve it. So what we are going to be doing is watching the rubble bounce again and again, because the economy for ordinary people is already in a shambles.
And you talk about the rise of China, you talk about the rise of BRICS, and one of the things that gets overlooked, I haven't heard anybody in the Western mainstream talk about this, is we have vilified China, we have vilified Russia, and in response, and so when you look at BRICS and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, for example, those creations were expedited by the American sanctions regime, by America trying to steal Venezuela's gold, by the United States stealing the Russia's fund. I'm drawing a blank on their sovereign wealth fund,
their reserves,
the sovereign, right? So those countries look at the sanctions regimes and they say, wait a minute, what if we work together based on our economies? We don't have to use the dollar. We can get off of the SWIFT system. We don't need the United States to approve an oil deal between India and Russia. We can do it in rupees, and we can do it in what I forget the Russian currency.
Rubles.
To hell with the dollar. And now the United States is standing out in its front yard crying foul. And the rest of the world is, because when you look at BRICS, what is it? 70% of the world's population is represented by the companies, by the countries that are in BRICS. Folks, the United States has shot itself in the head, Dr. Desai.
Well, yeah, I mean, the Biden administration, of course, is responsible for the sanctions policy, which was so effective in accelerating the BRICS sort of desire to create alternatives. But, it's not as easy as you might think. They need to go through a lot of hoops and
Sure.
so on. But yes, I would say that even before the BRICS arrive at any full-fledged alternative to the dollar system, it is quite possible that the dollar system will collapse of its own contradictions because, as I've been arguing, and I think we have discussed this a couple of times, Wilma, the fact is that the dollar system relies on unsustainable financial bubbles. And the latest one, which is generally called the everything bubble, has already been bursting since the spring of 2023, when we had the Silicon Valley Bank and so on, the collapse of those banks. And today, more and more asset markets are in trouble. And the only reason why they're not crashing is because they're actively supported by the Federal Reserve. So I would say that these asset markets, when they crash, and I think that it's only a question of when, not if, they will essentially make the dollar undesirable, because at the moment it's desirable because of these inflated asset markets.
And if you could quickly, because one of the elements that the Harris campaign had a serious problem with, in my opinion, is the economy. And there were the domestic economy, and there were circles that they just couldn't square. When Joe Biden comes on television and says the economy is doing great, well, he's talking about the financialized side of the economy. If you have a stock portfolio, you're happy as a clam. If you have a 401k program, you're happy as a clam. But if you don't have any of those assets at your disposal, you're hurting for certain. So if you could quickly explain the difference, the economy isn't doing well. And you write in one of your pieces, you talk about the fact that you ask the question, are we headed for a recession? Some say depression. Or is there going to be a soft landing? I don't see the soft landing, Dr. Desai.
Well, I wrote a piece a while back for a website called Sidecar, which is associated with the New Left Review, in which actually this is a pair of pieces. I wrote the first one in 2022 and then another one this past August after Powell's Jackson Hole speech, in which he was basically predicting that there would be a soft landing. And what I pointed out is that either if there is a landing, it's not going to be soft, in the sense that if Powell manages to kill inflation, it will not be without causing a recession, possibly worse, or he will fail to kill inflation at all, which will then be a no landing. And so that really still sums it up, because just this morning before our program, or this afternoon before we started this program, because I'm in London, you see, it's afternoon for me, I saw the headline news in the Financial Times. US inflation rate is higher than it was last month. So the inflation has not been quelled. It is still growing, and it is growing at the rate of growth of prices, which is inflation, is itself growing. So we can see, and I don't personally think that inflation is going to, and by the way, this is happening at a time when the more volatile prices, the prices of food and fuel, are actually lower than they have generally been. So imagine if they should go up for any reason or whatever, you are going to see a continuation of the crisis that ordinary people feel. And as I say, the financialized economy is also essentially, is essentially without foundation, and it could crash anytime soon. So even if you have investments, you're going to hurt. And of course, meanwhile, because so much money is being funneled into these speculative investments rather than in job creating productive investment, of course, ordinary people are hurting.
And this will be the final question. This is from Hot Channels. How do we pay off the huge debt that grows $1 trillion every 2 months. The elites are trying to achieve this through domination by militarism. And the domination by militarism, I think, is a great point. It's something that you and we talk about all the time. China and Russia and India, the BRICS, they are engaged in economic development and trade. The United States is responding to that with militarism. Dr. Desai.
Well, I think that this debt, considering that it has been incurred primarily to give tax cuts and subsidies and military aid to big corporate interests, I would say that if imagine some new incoming progressive government were to take power, I think they should open the books and they should cancel all the debt that is owed to all the rich people. They can create a benchmark, and all the US debt that's owed to the really rich people should simply be canceled. There would remain the debt that is owned by the ordinary Joe or Jane, and that can be repaid. But if you if you shave off, if you give a haircut, a complete haircut to, give a shave to the rich debt owed to rich people, I think the United States will be fine.
Well, as always, Dr. Radhika Desai, thank you so much for your time. Folks, please subscribe. The information is below, the various manners in which, through the Cash App and through all the other Patreon and so on. Dr. Desai, thank you so much for joining me today. As always, greatly appreciate it, and look forward to having you back.
Thank you so much, Wilma. Great talking.
And folks, thank you all so much for listening to the Connecting the Dots podcast with me, Dr. Wilmer Leon. Stay tuned for new episodes every day. Please follow, please subscribe. Got to get those thumbs up, got to get those likes, because remember, we're here for you, but we can't do this without you. Leave a review, share the show, follow us on social media. You'll see all the links below, scrolling at the bottom. This is where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge, because talk without analysis is just chatter, and we don't chatter here on Connecting the Dots. See you again tomorrow. Until then, I am Dr. Wilmer Leon. Have a wonderful day. Peace. I'm out.
Connecting the Dots with Dr. Wilmer Leon, where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge.